Pastor Rick here, E-Free Church, and just thank you so much for joining us. Always kind of a privilege to letting us and being a part of your, whether it's Sunday morning experience, Sunday later in the day, or just any time throughout the week. And whether it's on our digital platform, whether it's on our YouTube platform, or even here on Facebook as well, just thanks. Just so glad to be a part of things. If you're in Central Illinois, just hopefully you're kind of getting a little bit used to the warmer weather. You know it's a deep freeze. You're in the middle of a deep freeze when I think it was today, we got up to a balmy 18 degrees. And I was like, this is warm, from all the cold weather and snow that we've had. So, well, we're going to jump right on into our series on real relationships, really building and developing these kinds of healthy relationships in a very toxic world. This title of this message this week is called Exploring What's Under the Iceberg. Exploring What's Under the Iceberg. And again, we've been talking about building these real relationships in a toxic culture, a culture which I think we would all agree is, whether it's in marriage or whether it's in community, work, with the boss and the team members and politics, the left, the right, even churches. I mean, people, pastors, group members. We're all pointing the finger at everybody else. Who's the issue? What's the problem? They are. How do you build healthier relationships? And the reality is, in a culture that's kind of eradicated all kinds of personal responsibility, the Bible teaches us something radically different. That's why we went through verses like Matthew chapter 7, where Jesus said, don't judge, or you too will be judged. For in the same way that you judge others, you will be judged. And the measure you use, it'll be measured to you. Man, those are incredible words. So he goes on to say this, why do you look at the speck in your brother's eye and pay no attention to the plank in your own eye? How can you say to your brother, something like, take out the speck of your eye, this issue in your life, when all the time there is an issue, there's deeper stuff in your own life, in your own eye, so to speak. You hypocrite, he gives us the way forward, which is so important, kind of the thesis of why I've kind of put together this series the way I have, is first take a look at yourself, the plank in your own eye. Then you'll see more clearly to help remove the speck from your brother's eye. And I think this is really important because I think so much what transpires in our lives, in our souls, and as a result in our relationships, the good, the bad, and the ugly, is because of what's going on inside of us. That's why Jesus says, you gotta start there. That's why, if you've been a part of the series on relationships, the first couple of weeks have been all about kind of focusing on ourselves. And you're kind of thinking, when are we going to get to the other person, right? I get it. Hang on. We're going to do one more week. I told you for the first 3 weeks is a lot of kind of looking inside this mirror, the speck, the issues of your own life, so to speak. And then starting next week, we'll talk more about how to navigate some of this in relationships. But it's because so much of what transpires, though, in relationships is because ultimately you and I, the common denominator that we bring into all relationships is ourselves. It's ourselves. Another way of saying it, I've been saying in this series, is understanding what's underneath the iceberg. In other words, we all know that icebergs, what we can see visibly, is about 10 to 15%. But the reality is there's so much more underneath the reality of an iceberg. And kind of view your life like that. The lives are so much more to us than just what we can see, the physical. There's this thing that we're going to talk about a little bit today, this heart, so to speak, this inner world. And that's why I'm calling this series Exploring What's Under the Iceberg, so to speak. Now, in doing that, that's why we have to go back to the iceberg, exploring what's underneath the iceberg. Now, to help us understand this digitally, I was hoping to show a clip of the old movie, The Titanic, okay? But I realize we don't have the permission to do that, so I'll have to share pictures instead. Is that you all know the story of the Titanic back in 1912. Back in 1912, the Titanic took off, transatlantic from England, going all the way to New York. And what happened was awful on that April 14th and 15th day in the year 1912. The Titanic sank because it collided with an iceberg. And it was not seen. It was not the part that was seen of the iceberg. It was actually the underneath of the iceberg that ripped apart the undergird of the Titanic. What's amazing is it actually ruined 5 sections or five ports of the ship. If it just would have done 4, the Titanic would have stayed afloat. But because of what was underneath, the massiveness of this iceberg, it ripped apart 5 compartments, which ultimately led to its sinking, unfortunately, just hours later, killing, over 1,500 people. In my notes, I wrote it this way. It was not the scene of the iceberg that destroyed the Titanic. It was the part of the iceberg that was unseen that did its deadly damage. Think about it this way. Most people shipwreck, implode, or live inconsistent lives, kind of Jekyll and Hyde, because of the forces and motivation beneath the surface of their lives that oftentimes they've never typically even considered. The unseen aspects of the soul, the underneath of the iceberg, so to speak. I mean, we all know famous people, famous politicians, famous actors, some of you famous pastors. I can list a whole bunch of them. But it's not just the famous. I've been in ministry for 26, 27 years. Average people, everyday people like you and me, implode, destroy their relationships, marriage, friendships on a regular basis because of the inability to understand what's going on inside of them. That's why it's critical to explore what's underneath the iceberg for you and I. Now, the beautiful thing is the Bible teaches this very thing. In verses like Proverbs 4:23, it says things like this: above all else, guard your heart. Now again, what's a little bit different here is that the word for heart there in the Old Testament, the Hebrew word, is actually that which constitutes our inner being, our soul, that which makes us us. It's way deeper than the physical. We typically will use the English word heart, but it's so much more. That's your physical heart. It's that which constitutes you, your soul, your inner being. Guard it, because everything you do flows from it, including the way you react, the way I react to criticism. Or why, when somebody believes something different politically than us, that we have to defriend them. See, everything flows from our inner being, whether we realize it or not. We don't have the ego, the self-differentiation to allow people to be themselves and to have different thoughts and beliefs versus being threatened by that, just as an example, or why we can't feel, or why we can't love. For everything flows. You and I, as human beings, the way God made us, flows from our soul, our inner being. In this case, they use the word heart. Another way of capturing this is Paul, great prayer in Ephesians chapter 3, says this way: for this reason, I kneel before the Father, for whom every family in heaven and earth derives its name. And I pray for you. He goes on to say, I pray that out of his glorious riches, he may strengthen you with power through his Spirit in your what? Your inner being, your soul, that he may strengthen you. This is where the work happens, he's saying. So that, he goes on in verse 17, that Christ may dwell in your, there it is again, your inner being, the very essence of who you are, your heart, through faith. And I pray that you, being rooted and established in love, because love is ultimately what the Christian life is all about, of God, of others, and even yourself, that you may have power together with all the Lord's other holy people, okay, the people of God, to grasp how wide, how long, how high, how deep the love of Christ is in your inner being. And to know this love that surpasses just head knowledge. Because ultimately, truth isn't an object to be mastered or memorized. It's a person to be experienced, a relationship that you may be filled to the measure of all of the fullness of God. Now to him who is able to do immeasurably more than all we can ask or imagine, according to his power that is at work, and their phrase is within us, in our inner being. To him be the glory. And see, here's the deal. Why it's so important. The inner world, the heart, the soul, it's that which we can't see that's underneath our physical, that really makes who you and I are. The Bible teaches us. We got to do the hard work. I wrote down, there is an inner world that we must deal with. This is where the deep work of discipleship, sanctification, change is won or lost, where Christ's power can dwell in us to make us more like Jesus, to think and to feel and to act and to love like Jesus. To not do this ultimately leads to death of self, our relationships, churches, communities, and nations. That's why this is so important. That's why the work that I've been talking about for these last couple of weeks, and we'll try to really hit hard today in some application, is so important. An honest examination of our emotions and feelings is central. It's central to maturing in Christ and in love. Therefore, to be more inclined as a result with God's will and developing new, healthier relationship patterns. But it starts by looking in the mirror, doing the hard work of examining the inner self in order to transform us to become more like Jesus Christ. For the ultimate purpose is to allow the gospel to transform all of who we are. The intellectual, the physical, the emotional, the relational. That's spiritual. All of that spiritual of who we are. And both above as well as below the iceberg. And see, a lot of religion, including a lot of Christianity, is to focus on the outward, to clean the outside of the cup. And so much of what we do ignores this inner world. It's no wonder, sadly to say, that so many of us as Christians live just the same as those who are not Christians. The result, though, if we allow God to transform us, is that we will ultimately become better lovers of God, of others, and even ourselves. And we've said it, I'm going to say it over and over again. The essence of true Christian spirituality is to love well. Love the Lord your God with your whole heart, soul, and mind, and to love your neighbor as yourself. The essence of true Christian spirituality is to love. It's about a relationship, loving God, loving others, and even loving yourself. And ultimately, to build real relationships, it starts with understanding kind of the depths of your soul, the good, the bad, and the ugly. And ultimately, how can you enter someone else's world when you have not entered your own world, so to speak? Yeah, I wrote down empathy and compassion are key traits in building healthy relationships. I mean, without empathy, without compassion, without the ability to enter into a spouse's perspective of things, that relationship over time will fail. At work, whether you're a boss or a team member, to not be able to empathize and have compassion to see things from another team member's perspective, an employee's perspective, a boss's perspective, over time, if you're so self-focused, you will actually create damage to that team in churches, in communities, in friendships, even in politics and government. And again, if we can't do this hard work, and you're seeing more and more of that, I'm seeing more and more of that, no wonder things seem to be falling apart. Again, what we're talking about also is this. We're not talking about some deep dive into your internal world that will lead to more self-absorption and narcissism. I think we would all agree that this world needs a lot less of that. Less self-absorption, less of a selfie world, less of extreme narcissism. I like the way Scott Peck says it this way. In his book, A World Waiting to be Born, Civility, which we lack so much today, rediscovered. He says, we're all born narcissists. It's so true. And that learning to grow out of narcissism, that we are the center of the universe, is at the heart of the spiritual journey. Now, I get to do this. Maybe the most gorgeous little 8-month-old little girl ever. That's my granddaughter, Addie. I love her. We all love her. In our home, it's very, very Addie-centered. I'm telling you, she's taken over the entire house, almost every room. You know, everything we do is centered around Abby. It's just the way it is. No wonder. Without what we're talking about today, over time, we believe, if we inadvertently make it so that we believe we're the center of the world. And I love that little girl. I love her with everything in me. But she's not the center of the world. You're not the center of the world. I'm not the center of the world. We got to stop acting like it. Getting people out of narcissism is part of really, I think, the beautiful nature of Christianity. It sets things right that God is the center of the universe, so to speak. And that He is the center of all things. He is the creator. He is the one who is in control. We're going through Revelation. He is the master of all history. And our role isn't to pray and make His will our will, so to speak, or obviously our will His will. It's to take and make His will our will. To grow spiritually and to grow into healthy relationships with others, a revolution must take place in the way we perceive ourselves in relation to others. And so part of it is to help like little addies as they grow up to become adolescents and young adults and adults, is to help them realize is that we love you, sweetie, but you're at the center of the world. You're at the center of the universe. That people have, every single person you come eyeball to eyeball with has just as much value before God. And they're to be treated with respect and dignity and love, especially if you're a Jesus follower. That's why Jesus is always challenging this. He pointed this out to people all the time if he would just have ears to hear. In Mark 7 is a story. Many of you have read this before. Jesus called the crowd to him and said, listen to me, everyone understand this. He goes, nothing outside of a person can defile them by going into them. Nothing in the outside world, the big bad world, is going to defile you. Rather, it is what comes out of a person that defiles them. What's already there inside. It's inside. Now, after he said this and he left the crowd and he entered a house, probably going to sit down and have a meal with the disciples, and his disciples were asking about this parable. And he just kind of responds, are you so dumb? I don't think of Jesus respond that way, but oftentimes he did. What's going on with you guys? Hello, are you so dull? Don't you see that nothing that enters a person from the outside can defile them? The real defilement, he goes on to say, is from our hearts. It's what comes out of us. And he goes on to say things like in verse 20, what comes out of a person is what defiles them, what's already inside us. From what it is, from what within, out of a person's heart, there's that word again, inner world, our own soul, that evil thoughts come. We know this already, but it's easier to blame everybody else. It's easier to blame that side or this side, or technology for producing this and that, for sexual immorality, for theft, for murder, for adultery, for greed, for malice, for deceit, for lewdness, for envy and slander and arrogance and folly. And the list can go on and on and on and on and on. And what do? We even blame the devil sometimes. He made me do it. We have all kinds of spiritual, terminology to even push off the personal responsibility. Jesus says all of this is from what's inside. It's these evils that come from inside a person, that defile a person. That's why what we're talking about here is so, so important. And ultimately, we need to go beyond our actions, our behaviors and choices, reactions and belief, and to go to the whys. Why? Why do I do what I do? Why do I think what I think? Why do I feel? Why don't I feel? Why do I avoid certain people? You got to go deeper, the internal. Why am I addicted to, and you fill in the blank, to success, to adoration, from the compliments of others, to people liking me. Why am I addicted to alcohol or to drugs or to sex or to pornography? There's something deeper going on. You got to go to the beyond. You got to ask the question, why? Why? This is going deeper to the inside. This is where the difficulties are. Why do I emotionally disengage from my family? Why do I get so angry? I rarely get angry, but why do when I get angry, I blow my stack? Why do I react the way I do to people who disagree with me, who think differently politically than I do, who don't see things the way I do, who don't agree theologically with me? I mean, people are ending relationships. They're leaving churches. People have left here because of what we're talking about. There's something deeper going on. And ultimately, we want to blame everybody else. But it takes courage and deep faith to ask myself what might be going on underneath my feelings and actions. Whether it's in marriage, whether it's in your parenting, in your friendships, in politics, at church, the community, black, white. This is huge. That's why last week we talked about, in order to move forward in life, including in relationships, that sometimes we need to move backwards in order to move forwards. That our families are huge. P. Cesario said it this way in Emotional Healthy Spirituality: while we're all affected by powerful and external events and circumstances throughout our earthly lives, I mean, things like a pandemic, things like what's happening down in Texas right now, which is just awful, things like a diagnosis or cancer. Ultimately, he says, but our families are the most powerful group to which we've ever belonged. In other words, it's our families that have imprinted us to who we are, why we think, why we feel, why we don't feel, more than anything else in our lives. That's why so many of us are just so unaware. So, in my remaining time, let's do some work, okay? Let me bring us all kind of together and kind of push us to do the hard work of application here. Now, some of the things I've given you, some tools. I gave you, again, on the 10 commandments here of unbiblical or unhealthy family commandments, and I've given you that, and I want you, again, to take that out. You can find this, go to our church app on your Android or your Apple device, your phone, your iPad. Go to the eFree Church app. Go to the message section, on the bottom. You'll see the icon for real relationships. And in the first message, week 1, February 7th, you'll see you hit that. You'll see a place for notes. You'll see some message-based questions. You'll see this out there. Or, it'll be in the second message, and again, it's to spur you on to kind of think, is this some of the stuff that maybe I learned in my family? Like that it was such a push to be successful, that finances and a degree and a great job is where you find your security. Oh, yeah, there's God. And again, some of us, this is one of those things that you got to look deep inside. But the message over and over and over again was you got to trust your finances. I've seen people explain this, Christians in this country. That's why they explain the betterment of finances and all of that is what's so important. And I'm not saying that finances aren't important, but as a Christ follower, our security doesn't come from how much we make or how much we save. As a believer, ultimately our security is from God and God alone. Did we learn things in our family? And again, this will help spur. I want you to talk about this with a spouse, or if you got a small group. Use this as a catalyst. Does it make sense to look as you look through some of these? I think one of them is that, in my family, that we never learned how to deal with conflict in a healthy way. I never did in my family. So when I got married and Don and I began to have some conflict, oh my gosh, she would tell you, if I had her up here, Rick had no way of dealing with conflict. I was an avoider, like most of us, avoid at all costs. Why can't we all just be happy and get along? Guess what? That doesn't work. And ultimately, I had to learn the hard way The conflict is what actually can draw us into deeper intimacy and connection if we allow it and if we learn a healthy way. But in my family, I didn't learn that. In my family, I learned Dad ruled the roost. And in many ways, Mom and kids had no say in hardly anything. I learned things about marital roles like that. And I'm thankful that, again, because of my own marriage difficulty and pain, and we'll talk about pain next week, ultimately what's so important is pain is, and the Bible teaches us, is a main catalyst to allow us to change and to become more like Jesus, because it can draw us into that inner world like nothing else. And so use those 10 commandments, so to speak. You can do that. The second tool I gave you, another tool I gave you, was a Geneagram, okay? And you can do the same thing. It's right there with the 10 Commandments of unhealthy spiritual family commandments. This is going to take some hard work. And I know that Lori, our group's director, if you hit this Geneagram link, it will give you some of the instructions of how to do this, okay? I'm telling you, this is a powerful, powerful exercise. And again, it can show you where there's brokenness and estrangement. I my own family Geneagram, where my grandmother really disavowed a couple of her own children because marrying people of a different religion and a different form of Christianity, so to speak. And that's major in a family. That creates deep hurt. And it just doesn't go away, as we learned last week, the sins of a father and mother for 2, 3, 4 generations. Why this Geneagram is so important. And I know it's going to take hard work. I know, and it can seem dishonoring, but it's not. Truth is always honoring. I honor my parents. They did the best they could. But they also did some things because of their parents and their grandparents. And thankfully, God doesn't want to have your family of origin have the last word in your life and my life. He wants Christ and the freedom of Christ to be the last word and to remake us and renew us and transform us, so that we can love better our own families, our churches, our communities, our strangers, the Samaritans. So do this hard work. And again, I mean, you can look at it. I just did mine recently again. And I'll tell you, one of my eye-openers for myself was forgetting about, because part of the instructions are any earthquake events in your life, like an unexpected death. And even though my dad, it wasn't unexpected, he was 56 years old. Young. And I've shared that story before, but part of me is I didn't know how to grieve. Because I would go back to my family of origin, just that inner, under the iceberg kind of stuff is men were never supposed to cry. The message, the value, the commandment I learned is just deal with it. Go on, deal with it. The problem with that is, like so many of our family rules, so to speak, that we are passed on to us, is when they don't coincide with scriptural principles. God has not made us that way. God has made us in his image, and part of that image is having feelings. It's to help us to become more like him and to experience this world and creation. And so for me, I buried. It was months later. I was driving home from a meeting up in Chicago after my dad passed away. And I was driving home, and it was kind of funny, of all things, the Titanic music, Celine Dion, whatever her name is, the female singer, I'll botch it anyhow. Celine Dion, thank you, Brandon, sang this song from Titanic, and I'm on 294, and I'm bawling my eyes out. I didn't know what the heck was going on. I thought I was completely breaking down. I was holding in all the feelings of my dad's passing. And finally, like a beach ball, one of those plastic balls you blow up and you try to keep it underwater. At first, it's no big deal. But if you've ever done this before, you hold it underwater. As light as that sucker is, over time, the amount of strength, it comes up. That's the way that we're made. It's like an engine warning light. Warning, something's not right. Pain, the scripture teaches, can lead us to a deeper relationship and discipleship with God and to become more like Jesus. It's not by chance that I've struggled throughout my marriage and even in my parenting to understand some of the deeper feelings. For me, anger, I rarely got angry, but when I did, it was big. Because anger is one of those surface emotions. I didn't know how to deal with loss or rejection or critiquing or just my family, being frustrated, just normal things. And I share that because many of you can probably relate, especially as men. So it's important to do this hard work. It's important because that way you can start asking yourself questions like, what messages did you receive from your family about anger, about sadness, about fear, about feelings? And then do the hard work of how have these messages impacted you as an adult? Because you carry it with you. And here's the reality. I think I put it in my notes there. Not just the spoken, but actually I would actually highlight it's mainly the unspoken. This is why some of the contemplation I've been trying to put in some of these exercises, silence and solitude, to have you think about some of these things. I'm going to give you that instruction this week. Some of that might come to the surface, might come to light. Like it took me a couple of years to figure out that part of it is, again, feelings were just not really allowed. They just weren't really a part of growing up. And yet I'm very much a feeler. And that's okay, we all are. And to experience feelings and to understand them. And even I had to do the hard work in Christian counseling of identifying, what am I feeling? Now again, this is not just to be narcissistic, self-centered, absorbed. The reason we do this work is so that we can love others better. So I can love my wife. I can love my church. I can love my kids. I can love Addie, my grandchild that she grows up. I can love the person who is upset with me. Even the person who's upset with me, disagrees with me, the way Jesus does. Lastly, I gave you that emotional health survey. And it's so important to do this as well. And I won't have time to go into all of this, but if you had the courage to do this, if you take this survey, you're going to find from the survey 4 different stages. And again, part of this is to kind of reveal to you and me kind of where you're at when it comes to emotional health. And what I've said throughout this entire series is that you can't really be spiritually mature and not be emotionally mature. Emotional immaturity leads to spiritual immaturity. That's where a lot of where we're at today. That's why people are leaving churches and breaking relationships. I mean, it's happening here. It's happening all across the country. It's why family members are struggling with political viewpoints that are different because we're not healthy. We don't deal with the stuff that's underneath the iceberg. And so if you take the survey, which you can find the first week of this series on real relationships, part of it is to reveal some things. And again, go easy on yourself. God knows where you're at. None of this is new to God or a surprise to God. But some of this, I'll have to admit, can be difficult. I took the test, and I'll share with you my own a little bit. But let me just give you those stages. First is what's called the emotional infant stage, okay? And folks in this stage, they typically look for others to care for them. They have a great difficulty doing any kind of empathy whatsoever, entering into the world of others, so to speak. They are driven by instant gratification, and they use others, whether it's at work, as family members, as objects to meet their needs. Now, I don't think I can do a lot of explaining there. But if you're emotionally at that level, and some of you maybe do test out that way. I think of the person who goes from relationship to relationship, marriage to marriage to marriage, because in part, this is where they're at emotionally. The hard part is they make it all about the other person. But when you're on your 3rd or 4th or 5th marriage, maybe you ought to do the look in the mirror. Or if you're on your 3rd or 4th or 5th church in 5, 6, 7, 10 years, maybe it's not the church. Maybe you need to do the hard work of looking in the mirror, exploring what's underneath your personal iceberg. I don't think I need to explain these people are hard to be in relationship with. And if you test it here, part of it, you got to give yourself grace. But God doesn't want to leave you there, but you're going to have to do some hard work. Next stage is emotional children. They're content and happy as long as they get what they want. Well, who isn't, right? But we all know part of becoming an adult is realizing life's not fair. Things don't go your way. They unravel quickly from stress, trials, and disappointments. Does that describe you? Never really thought about it. You thought it was all of what's going on at work or the church or, in your life, in the neighborhood, whatever it is. But But reality, there's something inside of you that just doesn't deal with stress and disappointments very well. That's probably me, emotional child probably in many ways, even at 20 some odd years of age. My first, when I got married, I didn't deal with trials very well. Oftentimes these people interpret disagreements as a personal offense. When we've seen that in the country. They complain, they withdraw, they manipulate, they use sarcasm, and they take revenge when they don't get their way. They deal with conflict poorly, oftentimes pointing the finger at others, and again, going to a third party and just ignoring the issue completely because they don't have a strong enough ego to look in the mirror and do the hard work because of what's underneath the iceberg. Hope this is making sense. Emotional adolescents, again, they can tend to be defensive. They can be threatened also by criticism, but they do a better job. They can deal with conflict well at times, other times pretty poorly. They are preoccupied still with themselves a little bit, whatever conflict, whatever situation derives at work or in the marriage. They don't do the hard work of, maybe at times they do, but they don't do the hard work of entering into what their spouse is feeling, what their team member is feeling, what the other person is thinking and feeling. It's all about them. And see, as long as we keep doing this, no wonder we're feeling. No wonder people go from church to church. No wonder it's not really about doctrine. It's about emotional immaturity. It's no wonder we're getting so disunified as a country. I would argue it's about emotional immaturity. They have a great difficulty truly entering into someone else's world, pain, they're critical and judgmental. And the goal is to become more of an emotional adult, healthy, taking responsibility for your own thoughts, your own feelings, and your own actions, not blaming anybody else. You right away look at the plank in your own eye. You look at the inside underneath the iceberg to do the hard work. You're deeply in tune with your own emotional world. You're able to enter into the feelings and needs and concerns of others without losing yourself or having to distance yourself from them. You respect others without having to change them. You respect others without having to change them. You appreciate and love people for who they are, the good, the bad, and the ugly, not for what people give to you. I mean, think of the power of this. This is Jesus. He loved people right where they were at. He wasn't in it for what he could get out of it. It wasn't transactional from that standpoint. Having the capacity to resolve things like conflict maturely, negotiate solutions that consider others' perspectives. Man, can we please have a little more of that in the country and in government on both sides? But we need that more in our marriages, more in our churches. That's why all of this is so, so important. That's why, lastly, we'll wrap this up. That's why I've been talking about things like slowing down and silence and solitude, the Pause app. And I want to encourage you to incorporate this daily into your life. How does silence work, with God, so to speak? Well, the phrase I gave you is this from N.T. Wright: slow down in order to catch up to God. And sometimes you have to slow down in order to catch up to what's really going on inside of you. And so I want to encourage you. Make it a habit. We need this in our lives more than ever. This is a spiritual discipline that many have used for centuries upon centuries, but we typically don't talk much about it in our evangelical tribe. But I am finding it to be one of the most powerful disciplines in order to connect with God and to understand more authentically what's happening deep inside of myself. The good, the bad, and the ugly. And you can, in that silence, you can, why do I think what I think? Why do I feel this way in this situation? In the silence, you can do that. And then ultimately, here's the question, is how might God be inviting you to be still today so that you may be more aware of your feelings, your inner world, and better hear the voice of God? The reason we don't hear the voice of God very often is we're busy being human doings versus truly being human beings. Slow down. Give yourself permission. Enter into silence. I know it's uncomfortable. Rick, what do you do there? You just be silent. I'm telling you, if you incorporate this over time, Moses heard from God, not in the earthquake, not in the fire, not in the storm, but in the silence, in the whisper. But we have to be quiet enough to hear the whisper. And in the silence is where he might reveal some of the things I've been talking about. Why do I react the way I react in that scenario? Why do I avoid? Why do I feel? Why don't I feel? What about my family? And you give yourself some time this week. And here's the other thing I'll say, and I'll wrap this up. If you don't do this stuff, it's fine. It's your choice. But don't expect to get much if you don't put in. And don't expect relationships to change if you don't do the hard work, if I don't do the hard work, to look in the mirror, to explore what's under the iceberg, to examine the plank in our own eye, to do this hard work to become more like Jesus. It just won't happen. So I encourage you. It's up to you. I've given you a pass. There's more. You can read books I'd highly recommend, like Emotional Healthy Spirituality by Peter Scazzaro. Just incredible. He's got a website, emotionallyhealthy.org, and I encourage you to look there. A lot of these resources we'll make available. I encourage you to pick up a copy. He's got Emotional Healthy Relationships. It's a great book for groups. And so anyhow, God, in this quiet time, I pray that some of the things I've said here, Lord, can be encouraging as well as challenging to move us into a deeper relationship with you and to know ourselves better. Ultimately, we bring ourselves into every relationship. And a world and a culture, more than ever, that is saying blame others, that's eradicating personal responsibility, may we understand the Bible teaches that Jesus teaches and models something incredibly different, world-changing different. It starts with us to explore what's going on underneath in our inner world, our heart, underneath the iceberg, so to speak. If we do this hard work, I believe in contemplation and silence and spending time with you, God, maybe in a different kind of way than many of us have never spent time with you before, in solitude and silence and hearing from you and journaling. I pray that you would meet us in those times, that we'd learn more about you and more about ourselves, so that we could give some things up, surrender some things, acknowledge some of the things, the ways that we're wired, both the good, the bad, as well as the ugly, so that we can give those to you, that you can change us. Holy Spirit, like Paul wrote in Ephesians, to do that hard work in the inner self, that the fullness of God can dwell in us, so that from our hearts can be the well springs of life in our families, in our marriages, in our churches, in our friendships, in our interaction with those who are far from you. They need to see a different version of Christians and Christianity. May E-Free more and more be that kind of community for the glory of Jesus and him alone. We pray this. Amen. Thanks for joining us. Look forward to picking this up. We're going to be in I think some important areas of like listening and how to break through some of the walls on some of this stuff, so you won't want to miss it. Again, if you want to catch this message again, you can catch it again on our YouTube platform. Subscribe to YouTube, invite a friend. Thanks for being a part. We'll see you soon.